after the humiliation of Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office. But then I decided to wait and see what would happen afterwards. And everything descended from there to the point where we're now discussing whether the US might actually exit NATO. And we have a massive explosion of sectarian violence in Syria. It looks like a civil war. The Alawite Intifada has begun. It's disgusting what's taking place with the slaughters we're seeing on Syria's coast. So we're going to have a guest, Hekmat Abu Khater, join us a little later. But for now, I'm here with Aaron Mate. How's it going, Aaron?
How's it going, Max? Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here. We also had this week the Trump administration announcing that they're doing something else that the Biden administration wouldn't do, on top of talking to Russia, also talking to Hamas. And does that signal a shift in the right direction? At the same time, Trump also issued yet another bellicose threat toward Hamas, basically saying that unless they release all the hostages, the U.S. will join a fight against them. So it's a mixed messaging, but the fact that there's direct talks with Hamas, whatever that means, it's a significant shift from the Biden administration, which refused basically to speak to anybody, whether they were Russia or Hamas.
Well, we will definitely talk about, I have a lot to say about that, but we should get right into what took place in the Oval Office. What was it, like a week ago?
A week ago right now, as we're speaking. Yes.
Wow. Historic.
Yeah.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I watched this live.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good. We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. It's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should. You got to don't.
So there was that exchange, and then Zelensky gets increasingly petulant, unless maybe I got the order incorrect. And I think that's really key, is when the disruption from Zelensky came.
Yes, but after that, he broken this ceasefire. He killed our people, and he didn't.
Yeah, I think this was the initial.
We signed the exchange of prisoners.
Eruption.
But he didn't do it. What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? That you say what problems we have?
I have been to.
Come once.
I've actually watched and seen the stories, and I know what happens is you bring them on a propaganda tour, Mr. President. Do you disagree that you've had problems like bringing people into your military? And do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems, even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't know that. Don't tell us what.
I actually kind of missed that last comment at the time where he warned the United States of an impending Russian attack or some kind of attack.
Yeah, he's threatening the U.S. He's saying that if you don't arm me to the hilt now and give me security guarantees, you're going to have to fight Russia over here, which is what Adam Schiff also said too, famously on the House floor when he was impeaching Trump. But that wasn't the first time even in this meeting where Zelensky said that. He actually said that earlier too, a lot earlier, when he said that you have a nice ocean protecting you, but he talked about how unless you help us win, you're going to have to fight them over here. And when Zelensky was saying stuff like that, Trump and Vance didn't respond. When Zelensky called Putin a terrorist and a killer, they didn't respond. When he said there's no compromises with the killer, they didn't respond. It was only in the last clip you just played when Zelensky directly challenged JD Vance and said, what kind of diplomacy are you talking about? That's
and
finally.
he called him JD. He wasn't
JD,
like,
yeah. That's
what are
kind of
you
what
talking about, JD?
yeah. And then he
Give
said,
me
like,
your money.
yeah. And then he said, like, have you been to Ukraine? As if like the vice president of the US can't opine on the situation in the country where his government is fueling a massive war because he hasn't visited there. I mean, talk about petulance and entitlement. But the reason Zelensky was triggered is because they kept talking about the need for diplomacy. And he's so hostile to diplomacy, he couldn't sit there quietly. And this is after Trump even said, we're going to keep arming Ukraine. So Trump was even committing earlier in their meeting, we're going to keep he was asked by a reporter, are you going to keep arming Ukraine? Trump said yes. But Zelensky's so hostile to the idea of diplomacy that he couldn't control himself. And that's when he challenged Vance. And that's when it went off the rails. And the narrative we got from everybody across the political spectrum was a wide political spectrum was that Zelensky was ambushed. He was they set him up. No, he couldn't control his own hostility to negotiations because he knows that he's the one who walked away from a good deal more than 2 years ago, a good deal that he won't get anymore. So he'll be forced to accept something much worse. And that's why he's trying to avoid any kind of diplomacy whatsoever to keep this war going, to save his own political career. That's what happened there. And by the way, he lied in the process. He lied. I mean, in trying to make the case to JD Vance that you can't negotiate with Putin, he talked about how he signed a deal with Putin in December 2019 in Paris and that Putin didn't respect it. But Putin did. The main thing from that deal was a prisoner exchange and implementing the Minsk Accords. Later on that month, Zelensky personally attended a ceremony where he welcomed home prisoners freed under that agreement with Russia. And there was another one the following April, in April 2020. So Zelensky was lying about that, because he said that Putin didn't release prisoners. It's not true. He did. Zelensky even attended the welcome home ceremony for some of those prisoners. And then he said that, Putin didn't meet his commitments. Well, actually, it was Zelensky who started talking in early 2021 after the Biden administration came in about how the Minsk Accords were a thing of the past and he can't abide by them anymore. The Minsk Accords is what he signed on to fulfilling under that deal in December 2019 that he claims Putin violated. So not only was he hostile and confrontational, he straight up lied to Trump and Vance.
The Istanbul track, the Istanbul, what would you call them? The Istanbul peace accords, which were put on the table by Putin. They were
actually mostly drafted by the Ukrainian side. That was mostly them. His own team signed on to, which of course Zelensky also walked away from in April 2022.
April 2022, he had a team assembled, ready to go. One of the key negotiators, Denis Kislyev? What was his name? He was assassinated in broad daylight by the SBU.
Yeah, that was an initial negotiator who took part in the early, the early talks of February and March, and he was assassinated in a really weird event.
They didn't like him having direct meetings with the Russian side, so they iced him. They iced him out literally. Then you tweeted a clip that I think I don't have it in the notes, but I hope
I got it right here.
This is one of the negotiators. What is his name? Chai?
Yeah, Alexander
Chai. He's one of the key negotiators in Istanbul. And this just blows the lid off Zelensky's lie and the lies of his backers in the US, like Michael McFaul.
I was in that moment in the group of Ukrainian negotiators. We negotiated with Russian delegation practically 2 months, in March and April, the possible peaceful settlement agreement between Ukraine and Russia. And we, as you remember, concluded so-called Istanbul communique. And we were very close in the middle of April, in the end of April, to finalize our war with some peaceful settlement. For some reasons, it was postponed, but to
He doesn't say what those reasons are, but now we know what they are.
For
It was
some
the US
reason.
and UK telling the Ukrainians, we're not going to back you up and you should keep fighting Putin. That's why it was postponed, but which he's not going to obviously talk about there because it's embarrassing for everybody. But that's exactly what he's talking about.
My mind, Putin, this is my personal view, Putin in 1 week after started his aggression in 24 February last year, very quickly understood he did mistake and tried to do everything possible to conclude agreement with Ukraine. And Istanbul communique, it was his personal decision to accept the text of this communique, which totally far away from the initial proposal of Russia, ultimatum proposal of Russia, which they put before the Ukrainian delegation in Minsk. So we managed to find a very real compromise. So Putin really wanted to reach some peaceful settlement with Ukraine. It's very important to remember.
So there you go. I mean, as you said, Zelensky's claim that you can't negotiate with Putin. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about, JD? That kind of diplomacy, the diplomacy that your own negotiator said led to an agreement that the Ukrainian side walked away from.
And Alexei Arestovich, who was Zelensky's advisor at the time, said that hundreds of thousands of people would still be alive if we had accepted that good deal that was on the table, which Boris Johnson parachuted in to sabotage with the promise of Zelensky's not just weapons, but also his international fame. It will make you Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 2023. And so it was. Zelensky is addicted to his fame. What would the consequences be? Or have been if he had negotiated at that point? I mean, to be sure, that was when Russia's so-called special military operation was being exposed as kind of a tactical mistake because they were losing a lot of tanks and armor in the Kiev Oblast. They hadn't really found their mojo. They eventually established a really strong front line with trenches throughout the Donbass, and then exposed the weakness of the Ukrainian military, its manpower problems, which JD Vance brought up during the disastrous counteroffensive, which Mark Milley designed for them, in which they gained nothing. They didn't even gain inches. And ever since then, the war has just been a lost cause. So, but let's just say at some point he had negotiated, or he agrees to Trump and Vance's minerals deal. What happens to Zelensky? I mean, why is he so hostile to this?
Well, I think for one, he's trying to save face because, again, he listened to Boris Johnson. He listened to the Biden administration, who told them, like, we're going to, don't make a deal. We think you can win. Just keep fighting. Also, they wouldn't give him the security guarantees that he needed to reach a deal with Russia. Also, they gave him a bait and switch because that diplomat we just heard from, Alexander Charlie, he wrote a paper after the Istanbul talks, which said that basically the U.S. told us that they wouldn't make a deal giving security guarantees to Ukraine that involved Russia, but they would do it bilaterally. So after Ukraine walked away from the Istanbul deal, then Ukraine immediately went back to the U.S. and UK and said, all right, how about these security guarantees? And the Biden administration backed off from that. So we're not going to do that. So they did a bait and switch. So Zelensky got humiliated. And so that he doesn't want to have a deal now that doesn't include security guarantees, because that's what he basically walked away from in April 2022 over the promise that he would get it. And he needs that now to save face, because how else can you justify sacrificing hundreds of thousands of lives? So from his point of view, he wants to save face by getting something. Also, he doesn't want to stand for elections unless he has something to show for it. And third also is the threat of the ultranationalists, which has been hanging over him for years. They've threatened literally to kill him if he made a peace deal that respected the rights of ethnic Russians in the Donbass. So those to me are,
even with a security guarantee, they would say he stabbed Ukraine in the back.
Yeah.
This half Jewish, formerly Russian speaking figure, comedian.
Yeah.
So he could, if he makes a deal which stops the killing, he could still wind up either fleeing to Miami and becoming neighbors with Yair Netanyahu, or he could be dragged from the back of a truck with Azov insignia emblazoned on its hood. These are some very stark choices for Zelensky.